Well, like all the other speakers here, I'd like to start by thanking Tom Henry, Paul Joanides, and especially Miguel Falomir for both the marvelous exhibition that we see downstairs, actually next door, and the wonderful 2 days of study that's going to allow us to rethink a lot of the artists of Raphael's circle. For too long, Giorgio Vasari has defined the relationship between Timoteo Viti and Raphael. Vasari inserted Viti into the second 1568 edition of the Lives of the Artists, shortly after the life of Raphael. Viti's story appears as a coda to the first edition biography of Vincenzo Tamagni, also known as Vincenzo da San Gimignano. In the first paragraph, Vasari explains that he paired Vincenzo and Timoteo because they lived at almost the same time and both were disciples and friends of Raphael. These statements are highly misleading, as Sabina Faeser and Anya Zeller have noted. Although their lives overlapped, Vincenzo and Timoteo weren't from the same generation, and they did not have the same relationship with Raphael. While Vincenzo is 9 years younger than Raphael, and his derivative artworks prove that he was truly a follower, Timoteo was 14 years older than Raphael, so I doubt that he played the same subordinate role as Vincenzo. Indeed, it is rare in the history of art that a substantially older artist becomes a younger artist's pupil or follower. Before completely transforming the elder Viti into the disciple of the younger Raphael, Vasari addresses the problem of Viti's actual training in Bologna. He states that Viti studied first as a goldsmith and then as a painter, and applied himself straight away to copying and drawing all the best works of that city, although he omits the name of Viti's teacher. Fortunately, in the 17th century, Carlo Cesare Malvasia wrote that the goldsmith and painter Francesco Francia was Viti's master. Malvasia cited Francia's now-lost diary, which recorded Viti's arrival to apprentice with the goldsmiths on 8 July 1490 and his transfer to the painting studio on 4 September 1491. Malvasia again quoted from the entry for 4 April 1495, when Francia bid farewell to his dear Timoteo, adding affectionately, "May God grant him every benefit and fortune." What Viti studied in Bologna during his apprenticeship included several of Francia's major commissions, such as the Felicini altarpiece of 1490 and the Bentivoglio altarpiece of 1494, which had, as I will show shortly, a significant impact on Viti. But in Vasari's version of events, he marveled that Viti learned to paint without any particular teaching from any appointed master, and by copying works by those idiot painters in Bologna. Vasari then follows Viti's return to Urbino in 1495 at the age of 26, but he condenses this productive period in the painter's life to a few months and a few pictures, with the rest not worthy of mentioning. Instead, Vasari quickly shifts his narrative to inform us that Raphael invited Viti with great insistence to Rome, where Viti made great advances by working with his master, Raphael, on the fresco decoration of Agostino Chigi's chapel in the Church of Santa Maria della Pace. Vasari blunders when describing Viti's contribution, claiming that Viti invented and painted the Sibyls in the lunette with his own hand. Ever since Johann Passavant's 1839 monograph on Raphael, scholars have agreed that these figures show Raphael's invention and execution instead. But Vasari's claim that Viti painted the Sibyls helps him prove that Viti absorbed the lessons from his new master, Raphael. In reality, Viti probably painted the understudied angels and prophets flanking the windows on the upper wall. These were much restored in the 17th century and are difficult to photograph and examine properly today. Despite Vasari's assertion that the trip to Rome happened only some months after Viti's return to Urbino from Bologna in 1495, art historians date this Roman commission to at least 15 years later. In fact, judging from Viti's documented absences from Urbino in 1510, 1511, and again in 1513, Vasari compressed at least 3 Roman trips into one much earlier stay. Vasari characterized Viti's Rome sojourn as a second apprenticeship under Raphael, and thus a turning point in Viti's career. Viti, however, spent about 15 years in Urbino before joining Raphael in Rome. In fact, Vasari describes and praises the Arrivabene and Magdalene altarpieces for Urbino's cathedral, which are documented to 1504 and 1508, respectively. But he lists these only after describing the trip to Rome and falsely suggests that they were painted under Raphael's influence. In short, Vasari replaced Viti's actual apprenticeship to Francesco Francia with a mythical one to Raphael, and altered the order of events in Viti's life to exclude Bologna's influence and promote a pro-Roman, pro-Raphael agenda. After Viti returned home from Bologna in 1495, he became the leading artist and court painter in Urbino. He effectively replaced Raphael's father, Giovanni Santi, who had died the previous year. According to Giovanni Morelli, Viti was the best candidate to have continued training the 11 or 12-year-old Raphael. Berenson considered Morelli's suggestion, but decided that Raphael's genius did not require instruction, making Viti an unnecessary teacher. Like Vasari, Berenson discounted the Bolognese tradition as something Raphael would have done better without. I don't intend to revisit the debate over Raphael's artistic training here, but I will suggest that Vasari's biased categorization of the artist as an insignificant follower of Raphael has permitted scholars to ignore Timoteo Viti. Yet it would be a mistake to dismiss Vasari's biography completely, as it attests to the close relationship between Viti and Raphael. Vasari heard Viti's life story from the painter's youngest son, Giovanni Maria, who showed him letters exchanged between Raphael and Timoteo. And Giovanni Maria gave Vasari 3 of his father's drawings, including this one of St. John the Evangelist sleeping. In addition, Vasari mentioned many works of art by Viti that still exist. Viti worked in Rome alongside Raphael, and Timoteo and Raphael were friends. Any clarification of the relationship between Viti and Raphael should begin by setting aside Vasari's anti-Bolognese and pro-Roman agenda. Viti and Raphael had much in common. Both were born in Urbino. Their fathers died when they were still children, and their care was entrusted to uncles with careers in the church. Both the Viti and Santi families had their origins in Urbino's hinterland, the Viti in the hamlet of Villicicoccia, and the Santi in the small town of Colbordolo. The 2 artists' fathers were trained professionals. Bartolomeo Viti was a barber or surgeon, and Giovanni Santi a painter, and they moved to Urbino to ply their trades, start families, acquire property, and raise their social status. In addition to these circumstances, Timoteo and Raphael shared one of the most important Renaissance bonds. They were countrymen from the city-state of Urbino, and thus were enmeshed in the same set of social hierarchies, family clans, and political networks. And it is important to keep in mind that Viti had seniority over Raphael in all these local contexts. I propose a simple test of Raphael's so-called influence on Viti. I'll examine two of Viti's major altarpiece commissions, one from before and the other from after his trips to Rome, and compare them with similar contemporary works by Raphael. According to Vasari and the current art historical model, Viti's paintings should show his reliance on Raphael's style. I admit that the test is crude and needs a larger sample of works of art in a variety of formats and functions for a more decisive conclusion. But I do think that these two panel paintings, the Arrivabene altarpiece that is documented to 1504 on the left, and the Bonaventura altarpiece that is likely from 1520 on the right, are highly representative of Viti's style and compositions. The first marks the culmination of Viti's early career, and the second a high point in his production after visiting Raphael in Rome. A review of the 2009 Raphael exhibition in Urbino disappointedly summarizes the state of the Viti question. Quote, "It is difficult to assess if Viti had any influence on the young Raphael, as the works in the exhibition, and the reviewer specifically cites this, the Arrivabene altarpiece, reveal Viti's debt to Raphael rather than vice versa. In my opinion, this typical scholarly view still bears the mark of Vasari's distortions. As Silvia Farino demonstrated, this altarpiece was painted for the burial chapel of Giovanni Pietro Arrivabene, Bishop of Urbino, upon his death in March of 1504. Documents show that Viti and Girolamo Genga received the commission, which included the altarpiece by Viti representing the bishop saints Martin of Tours and Thomas Becket, which you see here, and frescoes with scenes from these saints' lives, which are now lost. There is no evidence that Raphael was involved in the planning or execution of any part of this commission. Nonetheless, Viti's Arrivabene altarpiece and Raphael's early paintings, like the Ansidei altarpiece of 1505, exhibit some remarkable compositional and stylistic similarities. Both pictures employ stepped platforms to raise the central focus of devotion. Behind this, an intermediary structure with an open archway frames a landscape view, although Raphael added the architecture at a late stage in the execution. Generally speaking, for much of their careers, Timoteo and Raphael's devotional paintings employ vibrant colors and saints with pensive expressions placed before landscape backgrounds and phosphorescent skies. These are elements of the so-called maniera devota, or devout style, and art historians, including Giovanni Previtali, Charles Dempsey, and Keith Christensen, have eloquently outlined this style's origins in Flemish art and extensive practice by the Bolognese school. Indeed, any similarities in the two artists' styles at this point, and between these two paintings in particular, are probably more coincidental than causal. The two men came from a similar artistic context, although nearly a generation apart. Their styles generally derive from the same North and Central Italian masters of the end of the 15th century, specifically Francesco Francia, Pietro Perugino, and Luca Signorelli. As you recall, Viti studied in Bologna with Francesco Francia, a great master of the maniera devota. Echoes of Viti's early training and a lifelong allegiance to his teacher reveal themselves in comparisons with Francia's works, such as the Scapi altarpiece on the right. Despite their very different subjects and compositions, these two altarpieces share an essentially tripartite division, with figures placed on a dais across the foreground, a screen of arches in the middle ground, and a broad landscape background. Viti also adopted the form of Francia's heads, which are cocked at an angle, and uses the same facial type with widely spaced eyes, small mouths, high cheekbones, and ruddy cheeks over broad mandibles. He also inherited Francia's highly stylized poses and, like Francia, Viti adored abundant, luxurious drapery. After learning the maniera di volta in Bologna, Viti returned to Urbino in central Italy in the mid-1490s. In fact, Viti's Arrivabene altarpiece also owes much to Perugino's Decemviri altarpiece in Perugia, from its sparsely ornamented architecture to the idea for the step and the platform. But variations in the two works indicate subtle differences in the artist's approaches to the maniera di volta. Perugino's delicate figures perform a decorous, if repetitive, dance in their colorful robes, while Viti's heavier bodies are firmly planted and more opulently dressed. If both altarpieces were sacred musical compositions, then Perugino's would be soft and feature an annoying refrain, while Vasari's would be richer and sonorous. And if Viti and Perugino's paintings are different religious songs, then Raphael's altarpiece is a complex variation on Perugino's, with tropes in the style of Luca Signorelli. Notice how Raphael borrows Perugino's throne structure, but flips the large and the small steps, and replaces its arched crown with a flat frieze and baldachin, while keeping its scrolls and palmettes. In general, the relationship between Perugino's paintings and Raphael's work at this time are the fruit of Raphael's recent study with the Perugian master, and any similarities between Raphael's and Viti's altarpieces pale in comparison. Thus, the Arrivabene altarpiece and Raphael's early altarpieces share the same sources, but neither clearly emulates or influences the other. Viti owes a further debt to Luca Signorelli. Farino identified this drawing in the Albertina as Timoteo's design for the Arrivabene Chapel's central fresco scene of Saint Martin exorcising a possessed cow, as well as several other individual figure studies that display Viti's knowledge of Signorelli's nudes. Indeed, Berenson attributed some of Viti's studies to Signorelli, which is not surprising, since Viti created these a few years after the inauguration of the San Brizio Chapel in Orvieto, and for frescoes painted in partnership with Signorelli's former pupil, Genga. Finally, I'd like to summarize my new interpretation of the chapel's unusual iconography as an addition to Farino's analysis. Bishop Arrivabene had supported Pope Alexander VI and his son, Cesare Borgia, before their devastating campaign to dominate central Italy. When Urbino returned from Borgia to Montefeltro control in 1503, the bishop found himself in the awkward position of explaining his past allegiances. He specified the subjects for the burial chapel in his will, and Viti represented St. Martin's horned cow as a rampant bull trampling the green fields, just like the Borgia emblem. In the context of Urbino in 1504, this allegorical imagery associated the bishop with St. Martin and implied that Arrivabene had encouraged the saint to extract the devil from the Borgia family bull. I argue that Viti's novel, heraldic allegory bolstered the bishop's efforts to exculpate himself in the eyes of the Montefeltro and the citizens of Urbino. Now I present the second part of my test and compare Viti's Bonaventura altarpiece with Raphael's Madonna of Foligno. Many scholars consider this Viti's most Raphaelesque painting, and undeniably, the two pictures have much in common. Both subscribe to the Maniera di Volta formula of saints decorously arranged before a deep landscape and a luminous sky. Here, at last, there may be a smoking gun. Raphael painted the Madonna of Foligno in 1512. Viti's altarpiece was painted about 1520 because the Bonaventura Chapel in the Church of San Bernardino was apparently founded in that year and because this painting and its preparatory drawings represent Viti's so-called second or late style. Indeed, the monumental figures show a new approach to the representation of volume, which likely emerged after Viti's trips to Rome, exposure to Raphael's circle, and Vasari's purported second apprenticeship. Thus, at first glance, it appears that Viti quotes Raphael's figure of St. John in his Bonaventura altarpiece and recycles Raphael's bipartite composition from the Madonna of Foligno. Raphael's St. John, however, is not unique, and neither is his composition. After Timoteo returned to Urbino from Rome, he turned back to Bologna for inspiration. The St. John in Francia's Felicini altarpiece, which, like Viti's Bonaventura picture, also pairs John and Sebastian, is a more plausible model for Viti's saint. Moreover, Viti's entire composition and iconography rely not on Raphael, but on Francia's Annunciation with Saints John the Evangelist, Francis, Bernardino, and George, painted in 1500 for the high altar of the Franciscan observance at the Church of the Annunziata in Bologna, and now in that city's Pinacoteca. Viti reversed the figures of the Virgin and Gabriel, but he preserved the hybrid Mariocentric iconography, which combines the Annunciation with the Sacra Conversazione. Alessandra Galizzi has demonstrated that the Franciscan observance in Bologna interpreted this unorthodox juxtaposition of themes as a precocious representation of the Virgin's Immaculate Conception. This imagery appealed to the observance in Urbino as well. The magnitude of the change in Viti's style, and the final point in my Raphael test, can be judged from reproductions. Viti's post-Roman work displays a sensitive chiaroscuro combined with weightier figures that vaguely recall antique sculpture. For example, he peeled back the shoulder of St. John's hair shirt to better reveal his anatomy, a novelty that Vasari praised. Perhaps now, in St. Sebastian's bared flesh, we can best detect Viti's experience alongside Raphael in Rome, and his willingness to alter his style and adopt Raphael's fuller, monumental, classicizing bodies. Yet to my eye, Viti's contradictory obsession with idealized figures rendered in fastidious, even microscopic detail only intensifies an earlier practice. You may recall the similar attention to the meticulous rendering of textiles and landscape in his Arriva Bene altarpiece, which is very different from Raphael's late work. I'd also like to point out a signature element. A sinuous vine wraps around St. Sebastian's tree as a metaphorical, visual pun on the artist's family name of Della Vite. I think, if we have it here, there it is. You can see the vine wrapping around the tree. Although there are several Raphaelesque elements in Viti's second style, these are not sufficient to label Viti as Raphael's disciple. In the Bonaventura altarpiece of 1520, Viti chose to reiterate figures, compositions, and subjects that he had seen in Bologna rather than imitate Raphael's models. While Viti did incorporate minor aspects of Raphael's Roman style, he uses these to update his own brand of the tranquil Bolognese maniera devota and rejects the increasing drama of Raphael's late works. Several examples persistently refute Vasari's thesis. The senior Viti was never the junior Raphael's disciple, follower, or pupil. Rather, the two artists shared sources and practiced a common devout style learned from Francia and Perugino. Indeed, Viti links Francia and the Bolognese school to Raphael. My reconstruction of the artist's substantial corpus of paintings and drawings rests upon a new conceptual framework. Timoteo Viti was his own man. His life and art are interconnected with Raphael, and he developed his style both earlier than and in tandem with Raphael, but not as a simple follower or disciple. Other words more accurately describe his relationship to Raphael, such as elder contemporary, friend, collaborator, and fellow courtier. Although Raphael is a topic of discussion in Baldassare Castiglione's Book of the Courtier, Viti was the actual, yet unmentioned, resident artist of the court of Duke Guidobaldo da Montefeltro in the fall of 1506, when that fictionalized tale takes place. Raphael's virtue and fame are undeniable, but Viti's accomplishments deserve recognition as well. For example, this family tree illustrates one area in which Viti succeeded and Raphael failed. Viti fulfilled every Renaissance man's dream of producing heirs, creating an estate, and passing his patrimony down for several generations, whereas Raphael died unmarried and childless, his possessions scattered. Viti's son Piero, also called Pier Vita, became a painter, his grandson Pier Antonio a knight, and his great-grandson Timoteo a priest and a poet. Finally, Raphael's artistic legacy owes a debt to Timoteo and his progeny. Although the details aren't clear, Timoteo obtained several Raphael drawings through inheritance or gift. The Viti family handed these down to their successors, the Antaldi of Pesaro, who marked many sheets with the initials RV and TVV before selling most of them to French and English collectors in the 18th and 19th centuries. As Anna Forlani Tempesti has shown, the Viti Antaldi collection constitutes an important part of the Raphael and Viti drawings at the Ashmolean Museum, the British Museum, and Pesaro's Biblioteca Oliveriana. How should we remember Timoteo? Not as a facile propagator of Raphael's style, nor a slavish imitator of Raphael's models. Rather, we may recall Viti as a pupil of Francesco Francia, as Giovanni Santi's successor as court artist in Urbino, as an innovator who designed the anti-Borgia imagery of the Arrivabene Chapel, and the head of a family that preserved many of Raphael's drawings for posterity. He also served as a bridge between Raphael and the Bolognese school, and practiced his own version of the Maniera Devota. Examining Viti's career not only helps us to correct Vasari and redefine one painter's relationship with Raphael, but may also open fresh vistas on the development and reception of Raphael's style. Thank you.